I'm John Batchelor, Larry Kudlow, CNBC and Kudlow Radio on the Weekend, my colleague and co-host, and we're joined by our colleague James Taranto of the Wall Street Journal editorial, keeps best to the web. James is here to address with Larry and myself the topic of we're ready for Hillary. Indeed we are. The news in these last hours with all of the crisis in the Middle East, you might have missed this note that a young person named Robbie Mook and a young person named Marlon Marshall have both headed to Iowa and New Hampshire to prepare for Mrs. Clinton's announcement, expected sometime in the next year, but certainly probably within April, and her announcement to be President of the United States. Ready for Hillary. This is a process so long in preparation that I want to turn, James, a very good evening to you, to entertaining what it will look like when the Democratic debates begin and Mrs. Clinton is not alone on the stage, joined by Governor O'Malley of Maryland, who is making remarks these last days that he will be a candidate, and Senator Webb of Virginia. Senator Webb representing the conservative part of the Democratic Party, Governor O'Malley representing the progressive part of the Democratic Party. James, what is to be gained, what is to be risked by Mrs. Clinton on the stage with those two speakers? Good evening to you.
Good evening. Well, I suppose she at least gets her face out there, and she probably is not in much danger from either one. I've long been skeptical about whether she will eventually run, but everything is pointing in that direction. As you say, she said she's going to, or it has been said on her behalf, that she's going to announce in April, which is now a little over 2 hours away.
Right.
And so everything seems to be moving in that direction. I suspect that we will see a little boomlet at some point for either O'Malley or Webb, more likely O'Malley, I think, because Webb is going after voters who have already gone to the Republican Party. But it looks like she's got a pretty clear path, and if there are debates, they will simply serve to give her a little exposure.
James, what? Well, of course, I have no idea what she's going to stand for. No idea. But I'm interested in O'Malley. I don't know when the first debates are for the Democrats. Republicans are in August. But O'Malley is from the Sandinista wing of the Democratic Party. And he's going to have very clear positions on tax the rich and redistribution and anti-war and all that great stuff from Bill de Blasio and Elizabeth Warren. Now, how's she going to react to that? And is he going to create a protest vote that maybe not for O'Malley, but it's against Hillary? Maybe it shows up in the polls first, James.
Well, look, progressives, left-wing Democrats, really do not like Mrs. Clinton, and that's why she lost 8 years ago, because there was a plausible candidate running against her. This time they don't have a plausible candidate, but I don't think they really want to vote for her, or large numbers of them don't. And so they will turn to the alternative, and at this point it looks like that's going to be O'Malley. But I don't think he has I don't think he will have sufficient support to give her a real race for it. I would suspect he will do a surprisingly strong second in some primary states, and she will ultimately bury him.
I want to press this just momentarily, James, because Mrs. Clinton's campaign is hinting as they do, they're going to set up headquarters in Brooklyn, New York, which is a popular place to run for president, and that the announcement will come in April. I understand that she will carry the day in Iowa, New Hampshire, but on the debate stage, there are no votes there. There's repartee. O'Malley is very smooth, and James Webb is ferocious. I puzzle if she has more to risk on the stage than to gain with a faux pas, something that the opposition party could use in the general campaign.
Well, that's an interesting point. I suppose what that suggests is that she will be very well prepared, and she won't have very much interesting to say.
Larry, do you follow that she will take no risks on the debate stage?
Well, I think James hit it. She will have very little interesting to say. In fact, it may be to the point where people don't even know what she's telling them. That's the way she's behaved so far. And I come back to this point. Well before the primaries start, you're going to have constant polling. And I think what's going to emerge from this constant polling is a revolt against Hillary, a sort of none of the above, that the Democratic Party is dissatisfied, and I think that's going to show up, and I think that's going to put her in a very unenviable position. And I just want to add one little thing here. Whenever she announces, I don't know, she's going to announce in April or whenever, James Taranto, I know the Wall Street Journal is not enamored of my friend Ted Cruz, and I'm not endorsing Ted Cruz. I'm not endorsing anybody. But I believe he set a new gold standard for announcement speeches. Whatever you think of the guy, he gave a brilliant speech in a very amenable setting, with all these kids at Liberty University. Nobody's going to match that. Hillary, everybody is going to look staid and dull and boring compared to Cruz's barn burner at Liberty University.
Well, and Mrs. Clinton, at her best, is staid and dull and boring. I mean, right. To go back to what we were saying before about the debates, the one thing that may be interesting is you look at that press conference she had a few weeks ago, and she was very cautious there. She was going out of her way not to reveal anything, not to say anything that might hurt her. And yet I think it was something of a disaster for her, because she sort of unintentionally ended up revealing that she had wiped her email server clean, and she looked very shifty. So I think even if she's cautious, there's a certain amount of risk just in appearing on the stage. And let's not forget, she does not have her husband's political talent.
Right.
And she's never won a really difficult race. She ran 5 points behind Al Gore in 2000. 2006 was not really seriously contested. By that point, New York was irretrievably Democratic, and it was a very Democratic year anyway. And then, of course, she was unable to win in 2008 when she was inevitable. So in a way, I think that's why the Democrats, or why the Clinton machine has been so careful to clear the field for her. Not that difficult a task, since the Democrats are depleted by their big losses in 2010 and 2014. But whether she'll be prepared for a general election is another question.
Let's move to the general election. To choose from the Republican candidates we know about right now, James, is there one or two or more of them who seem best prepared to go on the stage with Mrs. Clinton in the general debates that will begin in October of 16?
Well, I don't know. All of them have, the Republicans have a sort of embarrassment of riches here, right? They've got any number of candidates who are plausible, who seem strong. I guess all of them have some weakness or another. And if you look at, for example, Jeb Bush, he is a very strong candidate, except for the last name. And he's sort of, because he's a Bush, he neutralizes the disadvantage that Mrs. Clinton has from being a Clinton.
Well, I just wonder, Jeb spent a lot of time raising money, hasn't said much about policy.
He's raising a lot of money, Larry.
Yeah, but, I'm a Beatles fan, John, and money doesn't buy you love.
Thank you.
I think that's going to be a Jeb Bush theme as time goes on. And as you said, the GOP has embarrassment of riches here. You got smart governors. They're all doing their homework. We've had several of them to our dinners in New York for the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. We've seen Rick Perry, we've seen Scott Walker, and we just saw John Kasich. Carly Fiorina was Monday, and we've lined up Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, and we think Jeb Bush. I'm just interested. None of them have really clear specifics yet. Most of them are kind of in the same ballpark. But I think that the debates are going to be really important somehow or other. And let me just add, national security is going to play a very high, strong role in this election, and that's going to be surfacing in the Republican debates. I argue that is a big weakness for Hillary and could be a big strength for one or two of these GOP candidates. And by the way, Jeb Bush, you saw this flap with James Baker, who's always been against Israel. The Bush crowd, Jeb's got to show people he can think for himself. That's just still up in the air.
Larry, does Mrs. Clinton have a domestic policy? When you think of Hillary Clinton for president, do you think of one or many programs?
Well, I think of Hillary Care.
Yeah.
And I also think that in 2008, she ran to the left of Obama, oddly enough, on what became Obamacare. Now, I don't know how she's going to handle that. Okay, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows yet. And that's a big issue for her. And, of course, some of the other bread and butter issues. Look, is she going to go with Obama, tax the rich, tax businesses?
Income inequality. She's already used that term.
Income inequality,
yes.
That's exactly right. Minimum wage. People know that these are not growth measures, that none of this stuff is going to improve take-home pay for the middle class. They know that. And I don't know what the hell she's going to say. I just don't get it.
James, fair deal, square deal?
That is, she's going to have no choice but to go left. Let's take the three issues you mentioned. Minimum wage is bad policy, but it's popular. I think that's an easy one for her. Obamacare, she has already said, she had a tweet on the anniversary the other day of the 5th anniversary of the signing of Obamacare, in which she basically gave it a full-throated endorsement, or as full-throated as one can do in 140 characters, including a hashtag. She's made some noises about income inequality. And given that one of the raps against her with the base of her party is that she's too cozy with Wall Street, I think she's going to have no alternative but to go left and to try to make some Elizabeth Warren-type sounds. Of course, the other thing she'll do on domestic policy is try to hammer home the women's issues, the culture war stuff, as she's been doing on the Indiana thing. The Democrats think that works for them. It seemed to work for them in 2012. It didn't seem to work for them in 2014. We'll see how it works this time.
You've got to, whoever the Republican candidate is, quite unlike Mitt Romney, who was the progenitor of Obamacare, the Republicans are going to run against Obamacare unless they miraculously reform it. So I think that puts Hillary behind the 8 ball. I disagree on the minimum wage, James. I know it does poll, but if you add to the poll, the minimum wage will actually lose jobs, then it becomes very unpopular, and it's not a high-ranking type issue. And I agree with you about inequality and women's issues, and all I'll say is none of that stuff are big-time issues. The big-time issues are take-home pay, jobs, economic growth, and the Middle East mess. And I don't think she's going to have anything fresh to say about that at all. And that's why I think she's handicapped going into this thing. I think she's damaged goods, gentlemen. I think she's damaged goods, and she's going to have to prove otherwise.
Larry Kudlow, CNBC, and we thank James Taranto, Best of the Web, the Wall Street Journal editorial. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show.